we want to essentially get into funding scientific research. It's a gigantic marketplace. I think like including even private companies, it's like $1.2 trillion annually. I know like the NSF's budget is above $20 billion every year. And there are a whole, like lots of money funded into science via nonprofits and private individuals as well. So if we can help to administer research grants in like a more effective way that helps to increase the quality of the science and also reduce the grant giver's overhead, we think that's probably the best way to, make a whole lot of money in a company that will actually increase the quality of research outputs.
Welcome to the Never Die Podcast, your weekly source for crypto alpha for those who never quit. Today we're having on Patrick Joyce, co-founder of Research Hub. And he's one of the co-founders. One of the other co-founders is Brian Armstrong, co-founder of Coinbase. And this is a crypto project within the DeSCI sector. And if you've never heard of DeSCI, it stands for decentralized science. And it is this movement of open science that wants to get rid of a lot of the inefficiencies in the traditional science model and open up science for more collaboration, more people to participate, and to really speed up the scientific process so that we can get more research done for more innovation and more breakthroughs and really just a lot more cool things. If you think about the modern society, we were promised, 50, 60 years ago, all these crazy things like flying cars and, curing all diseases and living to your 300 years old and all this kind of crazy stuff that we really aren't seeing today. If you look at most like advancements, it's often in tech. And it's like, hey, cool, we got this new software that makes talking to your friends at work easier, or, whatever. We have a lot of SaaS companies and a lot of things that are cool, but that they're software oriented and they don't maybe improve humanity as a whole. And the goal of open science is saying, hey, we want to get back to the roots of science, really open it up and see what we can enable by doing that and bringing that funding forward. And when you look at something like crypto is great when it comes to funding things, right? We'll fund a meme coin to 10 billion. We'll fund 50 alt layer ones that are trying to kill Ethereum. Crypto is like a lot of money looking for something looking for something to do essentially. And DeSCI seems like it could have the answer, at least in part, to where this money could go. I feel like a lot of people in crypto would rather gamble on some scientific breakthrough, would rather gamble on like, hey, this thing, this drug could cure cancer. Would you like to invest in this? Or, this guy's trying to research and invent flying cars. Would you like to invest in this? And, everything's a gamble. Meme coins are a gamble, whatever. Like, it's always a gamble, right? You're always taking on some level of risk. But at least me personally, I'd rather that risk come with something like this. And if you think about something like a meme coin, like say you succeed, and we talked about this a little bit in the episode, say you succeed with a meme coin. The outcome is that like, cool, you make a lot of money. But if you succeed with something like curing cancer, yes, you make a lot of money, but also, the research you funded now cured cancer. We now advanced humanity quite a bit. So in this episode, I talk with Patrick about all things Research Hub. I talk a lot about Research Coin. What is that? How does that tie into Research Hub? We talk about the mission of Research Hub and like, what are they doing? Like, what are they actually improving on? What are the current problems in science? And how does specifically Research Hub want to fix those problems, and how does it currently enable fixing those problems? What are the current stats on Research Hub today? Like, who's using it? How many people are using it? How are they using it? And where does Research Hub imagine going in the future? Is it going to produce revenue? Like, how is this sustainable long term? All those things we jump into. This is a really great episode. Even if you're not into crypto, this is a really great episode just to learn about this really interesting niche that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with. That being said, let's dive in. All right. I guess to start us off, can you just introduce yourself? Like, who are you and how do you relate to Research Hub?
Totally. So my name is Patrick Joyce. I'm one of the co-founders and the COO of Research Hub. And I guess just like a little bit of a background on myself. I'm a huge science nerd. I was really lucky in college. I got to do some undergraduate research at Johns Hopkins studying tumor biology, specifically the epigenetic signatures of cancer stem cells. This may be TMI, but there's this like small population of cells within a tumor that can actually cause metastases or the cancer spreading to elsewhere in your body. So what we were doing was specifically looking at how these cells were different than the rest of the cells within a tumor in order to potentially like figure out a therapy that could target those cells specifically. So it was a ridiculously cool project. I was working on it in Howard Hughes Medical Institute funded lab in Hopkins with like 30 of the most like self-starting creative scientific people I've ever known in my life. I fell in love with that sort of environment for academic science and decided to start a PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry. I quickly found that not all academic labs are quite as lovely as a really well-funded Hopkins lab. There are like tons of issues in how like science is funded and published that create like weird incentives and eventually like a really low quality of life for the average researcher, and also like low quality of result, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in the podcast. So I was frustrated with that in general and have like a ton of pretty crazy stories from that time. So I ended up leaving with a master's, decided to start medical school at Georgetown. I was very interested in psychiatry and mental health. Georgetown's amazing. They get you into the clinic like during the first week of medical school. So you start like interacting with patients like very quickly. I quickly found there too that some of the frontline medications in psychiatry don't work as well as they're sort of advertised to. Some of the most common mental health conditions like anxiety, depression, PTSD, the frontline therapies work a little bit better than a placebo, but not a lot better. And at the time when I looked down the pipeline of like exciting drugs, that were like gaining popularity in psychiatry, the most excitement was around kind of like natural medicines that were like being accepted by Western society. So it wasn't like some new crazy innovation coming out of like some space age lab at MIT. It was like cannabis and like psilocybin and acid and MDMA being used for like PTSD, a variety of other things. And so like, while that is cool, I was like, hey, you'd think it's like, at the time it was like 2016, 2017. Like you'd think that there would be more modern sort of medications, coming from like our new, better understanding of how the brain works, but that just simply isn't the case. And so I was frustrated with this, thought a lot of the reason was due to sort of the broken like financial infrastructure for academic science, sort of slows down new discovery. And so at the time I was a huge Reddit nerd and was like, hey, if you could maybe use this Reddit style of conversation for academic science, like it could actually help things a lot. So I made sort of like a V1 of like a Reddit for Science with a token incentive where the idea was to reward folks for participating in healthy research behaviors. And from there, I was very lucky, able to get in contact with Brian Armstrong, who's the co-founder of Coinbase. And we've been working together now on Research Hub for like 3 or 4 years now. So yeah, that's kind of like a high level of my background and why I'm excited about this problem.
That's amazing. That's an amazing kind of journey that you've been on to get where you're at. And I'm also really interested in health. And like, I feel like when you look at the medical fields and you look at the kind of pharmaceutical field, there almost seems to be an incentive misalignment where, kind of how you described a little bit earlier, it's almost geared towards trying to sell you a drug, right? Versus like maybe you would imagine the medical field and the pharmaceutical field should be geared towards how can we get people as healthy as possible. And it feels like maybe some of that comes from that incentive misalignment from these companies that are funding a lot of the research. Are these big maybe pharmaceutical companies, in some cases maybe they're big food companies that have other incentives when it comes to selling these drugs and selling this food, where it kind of feels like what you're doing and what maybe the open science DeSCI movement is trying to escape that and say, hey, what if we could fund pure science that is outside of this kind of sphere of control? Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. What you were saying kind of reminds me of the story of like the food pyramid that was published, like, yeah, I remember when I was in like elementary school, like it was one of the first things they show you, eat your like 10 servings of bread every day. And, you can have like 1 serving of sweets, if you do all that. And so that's an interesting story where it's just, like the moral of what I'm going to talk about here a lot today, and this is going to sound kind of hand wavy, but it's just like life is hard and science is complicated, and it's genuinely very difficult to establish truth from not truth in the real world. And so at that time, that was a recommendation where there were all kinds of financial incentives, at play in its design. For instance, there were like subsidies for farms, and the government wanted to create demand for like grain products and things like that. So it's like a recommendation that came from maybe like the health of the country as a in whole, more so than like the health of the average human being. But like it was reasonable enough. It wasn't like people were like, this is obviously wrong. It's hard to tell. Like, it makes sense. If you eat fats, you're going to get fat. It's very difficult to actually tease things out. But one of the beauties of the internet is it's allowed everyone to have a voice and for everyone to share their own experience. And so, for instance, I don't think it's like coincidence that things like paleo diets, intermittent fasting, high intensity interval training, things like these gained a lot of popularity once the internet started to take off, and people could share their own personal experiences about different diets and like different exercise routines. And once you have a sample size of everyone in the world sort of reporting on their own personal experiences, it's a lot easier to kind of get down to what truth truly is. So yeah, that's a great example of like how there are all kinds of weird financial incentives at play in the world. And at Research Hub, what we're hoping to do is to create a product that pays folks for getting involved in the science themselves, whether it's publishing, criticizing, sharing their own real world experience. We want to create an outlet where anyone in the world can make a living by helping to further humanity's understanding of the world around us.
The food pyramid is an interesting case of, a form of, it's almost like a regulatory or financial capture of like the health system in a way. But I saw a study recently that I thought was so absurd. And it was talking about Lucky Charms, and it had them placed healthier than like Whole Foods. And so that's another example of like the financial incentive structure pushing maybe not truthful things on when it comes to health, et cetera. And it's kind of been skewed. And when you think of science, when I think of science, I think, man, I want the best, the smartest, and the brightest, no matter who they are, where they are, how much money they have, to be able to get their ideas out there, rise up, and just do the best science. And you have that in like tech, right, where you'll have like two guys in their garage start this tech startup that turns into Apple. But it feels like in the scientific field, that's just not the case. Like, you actually have to be really good at almost like politicking and like climbing this specific ladder and publishing these papers and all these other things that have nothing to do with science. And they're a lot more like running for government or running for office or something like that. I've heard that's kind of like part of the movement of open science or DeSCI is like, yeah, let's get past that and let's enable anyone to just do amazing science.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I think like the core issue that the scientific community is dealing with, and once again, this is a little bit hand wavy, but it's just impossible to objectively determine scientific quality. So what's happening now is there are patrons of science like the NIH, the NSF, like big government institutions. There's also like wealthy individuals, like Bill Gates will give money to like specific types of scientific research. And then there are nonprofits like Susan G. Komen, who help to organize like funding for breast cancer research. So what these folks do, they're normally pretty altruistically motivated on the whole. And what they want is to invest their money in a way that produces the highest kind of like return on investment in terms of scientific quality. The issue is it's very difficult to compare one scientist to the next. So if I'm Susan G. Komen, I put out like a request for proposals saying, hey, anybody who wants to study breast cancer, like apply to this grant opportunity and I'll give you some money if I like your project. So when you're actually sitting at the table looking at all the applications, like how do you determine who's the most likely scientist to give you a good return on your grant capital investment? And sort of what's been grandfathered into today's world is this concept of bibliometrics or citation-based metrics. The idea here is like, as a scientist, the way that people can tell if you're productive and a good quality researcher is you have to be productive. So that's publishing often. So just publishing papers like once a year typically. And then you need to generate impact. And so impact is basically citations. So when you publish, do others in your field sort of recognize the value of those publications as measured by citations? And like, this makes a ton of sense, like in theory, when you're just like thinking about it, right? Like if Jesse, if you publish a paper in Nature and then like all of your colleagues are like, whoa, this is a great paper, you know, like we want to cite it in our own work. Like that's it's almost like the PageRank algorithm for Google. You know, it's like a pretty good way of, in theory, determining like who's doing quality work. The issue is that like scientists are very smart. There's a hyper competitive marketplace for funding. So just like a little bit of context here, less than 2% of first year PhD students end up becoming full research professors in the United States. So there's like a 98% chance that you're going to have to leave academia or even leave science in general. So in order to have success, you need to do literally whatever you can in order to optimize your chances of receiving the funding you need to have a career in science. And so since scientific funders are all sitting around a table and they're making grant determinations based on the concept of bibliometrics, or again, citation-based metrics, as a scientist, you're pretty much obligated to try and maximize like your bibliometrics, like the numbers of papers you publish and the amount of citations they generate, just to be competitive for the next grant. And so this creates this whole like weird, like downstream, like incentive structure where you're trying to get cited a lot, not necessarily produce the highest quality research. So it sounds like a small distinction, but there are all kinds of weird behaviors that folks engage in order to create a publication that's likely to be cited a lot that actually detract from research as a whole, like the quality of research. So just like two examples. One is something called p-hacking. So there's this sort of concept in science of like statistical significance. And generally this is accepted as having a p-value of less than 0.5%. That means basically like 19 out of 20 times the effect you're seeing will happen again in the real world. And that's what people just kind of like arbitrarily decide is statistical significance. So getting a p-value of 0.051 can actually preclude you from being published in a very high impact journal, getting a lot of citations, and being more likely to receive funding in the future. So what folks will do is they'll conduct an experiment. They'll like do statistics on it. They'll tweak their statistics in order to generate a p-value that's lower than 0.05. This is called p-hacking. And the end result is that you're sort of like putting a spin on your research in order to get it published in a higher quality journal that actually reduces kind of the truth being told within the paper and makes it less likely to replicate. So long-winded way of saying the core issue in science is that it's impossible to measure quality. The ways that we're currently measuring quality have been gamed. According to Goodhart's law, whenever a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So that's what's happening today, is scientists are understanding that they're being measured by these bibliometrics, and they're optimizing their work outputs to generate lots of bibliometrics instead of high quality research. And all kinds of issues are downstream of that.
Well, obviously, this sounds like a pretty big issue. We want out of our best and brightest, the smartest in the world, them to produce cures to some of our worst diseases and all kinds of cutting edge science that's going to change our lives, not not to be optimizing to write the most research papers. So how do we fix a problem like this? Like, what is your guys' approach to say, hey, this is a messed up system. Here's how we want to fix it.
Yeah, so I think the answer lies within Goodhart's law itself. Like, whenever a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. This is just a fact of life, and it can be seen all the way from like employees at a company trying to hit KPIs. Governments will pump specific metrics, you know, intentionally in order to get some kind of outcome they're looking for. This is just human behavior and how it works in like an economy. And so at Research Hub, we think the way to move past this is to accept that Goodhart's law is kind of like this law of nature. And any measure that's used to like try and like be a proxy for scientific quality will eventually be gamed and lose its efficacy as a measure of quality. So instead, we just want to set targets for behavior. So understanding that all measures will eventually become targets for behavior anyway, we talked to our community and said, hey, community, like what scientific behaviors do you all value? Like, how about we just try and directly financially incentivize specific behaviors intentionally in a way to like reward people directly for doing like behaviors that will result in high quality, reproducible research. So we got a bunch of folks together, ended up doing a snapshot vote on this among the ResearchCoin token holders. And we decided that the types of science that we wanted to incentivize are open access papers, pre-registered papers, and then papers with open data. So just as a little bit of context, a pre-registration is a tool that's used within science where you basically share a blueprint for your research before you start to conduct it. You talk about like a summary of your research, you outline the hypothesis that you plan to answer. You have experimental methods written down, a plan for statistical analysis written down. And what this does is it basically like holds you accountable during the research process. So when you get a p-value at the end of your work that says 0.051, you can't just pivot mid-project. You have to publish that result as you described it beforehand. And this results in like much higher quality research that's easier to replicate. And so at Research Hub, what we're doing is based on our community feedback and a democratic vote of the token holders, we're updating our reward algorithm in order to specifically bring tokens to folks that are publishing well-cited papers that are open access, have open data, and are pre-registered. And our goal here is to try and like basically help to create a financial incentive for the average researcher to think about more than just their bibliometrics.
Got it. So it's about focusing in on different values that are more useful when it comes to producing actually good research. And how does the financialization aspect work? So you guys have you have the research token or research coin, and then you guys do like some sort of fundraising for research, and I think that's done in research coin. How does this whole system kind of work?
So the kind of number one use case for ResearchCoin is as a governance token. It's impossible for like our small team, of 5 to 10 people to figure out what's the best way to incentivize science. So we lean heavily on the folks who hold ResearchCoin to democratically make that decision with us on like exactly what behaviors do we want to financially reward. In addition, there's all kinds of cool stuff that you can use ResearchCoin for on the site. The most exciting example of which is bounties. So we have a variety of like bounty features on the site where you can use ResearchCoin that you've earned on the platform to financially incentivize specific behaviors that you're interested in personally. Two cool examples of this. One is a neuroscientist named Jeffrey Corey, who's one of the co-directors of the Research Hub Foundation. He was trying to finish up his PhD last year. He was stuck on a method in his lab, and he needed some advice from someone who was later in their career. So Jeffrey made a $200 ResearchCoin bounty for an expert to come in and give basically some insight into some protocol that he was trying to do in the lab. And so we have some like later career research or neuroscientists on Research Hub, and they stopped by the post, answered the question, received the bounty, and Jeff was able to move on in his experiment. So creating bounties to like incentivize specific actions. Probably the most exciting thing we're seeing with this today is around peer review. So in science, folks have recognized there are a lot of problems with the way that we publish papers and judge quality through bibliometrics. So there's all kinds of new innovations trying to help solve this. One of the ones with the most traction is something called a preprint. So a preprint is basically like server where you can share scientific papers before they're peer reviewed. This was gained like a ton of popularity during COVID because things were moving so quickly. Oftentimes peer review can create like an unnecessary temporal delay. The average is it takes between 3 to 9 months to have a paper peer reviewed. So you're kind of looking at like, a window into the past whenever you read a peer reviewed paper. Preprints solve this problem because it allows folks to directly publish on peer reviewed research. The only issue is some people, more traditionalists within the scientific community, question their value because it hasn't gone through rigorous peer review. What we're doing at Research Hub is trying to make this peer review process a little bit more transparent. So we create peer review bounties on preprints. So experts can come in, earn $150 worth of research coin for reading the paper and sharing an open peer review on top of this preprint. And so we're probably doing between 120 to 175 of these every week now, which is comparable to like a big journal like Science or Nature or something like that. So yeah, one of the most exciting utilities is creating bounties on Research Hub. And then in the future, we're planning to do a couple of like added sort of things to this where you can use it to help fund research studies. You might be able to like stake research coin on like specific papers that you're excited about. We're dabbling with the idea of maybe a replication prediction market and a couple of other things. So that's sort of the use cases that we have now and some more stuff coming in the works.
I've always imagined that, especially in the crypto space, there's like almost a demand for something to throw money at, but not currently a ton of places to throw it at, right? And so you get a lot of people funding like meme coins and, like the 10th, alternative Ethereum killer. But it feels like there's a really big opportunity in the science space to fund things that not only like be really beneficial and could turn into these maybe great businesses later down the line or products, but also things that could change the world. And or maybe a lot more efficient and better use of that capital than what we're seeing today. And I know in like the college arena, like if you're a professor or a researcher at a college and you come up with some crazy breakthrough, the college owns a stake of that breakthrough, if I'm right, from what I understand. Is there any models today within the DeSCI community where it's like that, where it's like, hey, I could fund this research and say this comes up with a drug that cures cancer, or say this comes up with a new cool way to make water bottles that's not made out of plastic or whatever. Those people own a stake in that future. Is that something that the regulation doesn't allow today that you'd hope to have, or what's the current setup of that?
So that's a great point. It was actually hilarious. I remember the first day I was rotating through labs when I was in my PhD program. And before they even let you into a lab, they take care of the most important stuff first. So they bring out this piece of paper that says like, hey, just so you know, if you invent anything during your time here, the university has to take 50%, so that's theirs. And then your PI actually needs to take the other 50%. And by the way, you own zero. So like if you invent anything, good luck. Like maybe you could get these people to tip you or something. And I remember seeing that, and this before like I had even been thinking of crypto or like starting a company or anything like that. And I was just like, man, this is a great way to get me to not invent anything while I'm here. You know what I mean? So like, yeah, it's a huge problem. And it's just kind of like, it's just like an old school issue, right? Where it's like these universities used to be the only places in the world where you could do this kind of research. So they have incredible leverage on folks and can like demand, 50% overheads. And it's even more than that sometimes with IP, just right off the bat for, providing the infrastructure. So yeah, this is like one of the main sort of value props of decentralized science. There are a bunch of folks trying to tackle this right now. For instance, if you're familiar with the Molecule project, they're building BioDAOs. This is a very exciting concept, I think, where basically what you can do is you can crowdfund research experiments and have some like IP rights that come out of that. So the big picture idea here is you want to kind of like one of the most interesting things about token projects in general to me is like how united a community can get, like pushing something specific. Like you can really align incentives in a powerful way that wasn't possible, before like Ethereum using these tokens. And so what VitaDAO is trying to create is basically communities around specific research like topics where patients and researchers and entrepreneurs can pool their capital and their expertise in a way that helps them to like generate, a valuable product and then IP value alongside with it down the line. So yeah, I think VitaDAO is a great example of that. Athena DAO, Cryo DAO, they have a whole bunch of different kind of like sub-DAOs that they're using to explore specific research topics, among with a bunch of other projects in general that I think are working on that problem in the DeSCI space.
Yeah, because I love that concept and I love that idea. And I would imagine once unlocked to the full ability, you will see tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars worth of capital flowing into this research, which, I mean, that's good. Like, that's way better than it flowing into meme coins or flowing into, useless things we don't need. And, the speed that capital means more research is being funded, more research is happening. That's pushing the speed of finding a solution and, or even incremental solutions, right? Because a lot of science is like, hey, we made this discovery. And then somebody's like, we made this discovery. And it's like each little bit of progress leads to this outcome that maybe nobody could even predict. So, okay, so that's kind of the picture. Research Hub, though, is more of a place of bounties, research, and publishing. So it almost replaces the traditional journal model and peer review model. Is that a good way to encompass it?
Yeah, totally. We call ourselves a next generation preprint server right now. So it's kind of like we aggregate all preprints and then put financial incentives on top of them. In the future, we want to get into funding research as well. So basically helping to bring more capital into the space. And yeah, potentially some tokenomic mechanisms on top of that to help increase research quality. For instance, like a prediction market for replication. So
maybe to help people understand an overall picture of where you guys are going or your big picture, imagine, I know this is kind of hard, but imagine 10 to 20 years down the line, with everything you're trying to do at Research Hub and your wildest dreams come true with it, what would you hope Research Hub is 10 to 20 years down the line? Where does it fit into the big picture of science? What is it producing and what are the outcomes coming out of it?
Yeah, totally. So I think a great analogy is kind of like Spotify for scientific research. So if you travel back in time with me to dial up internet and downloading Blink-182 from LimeWire, I think there's a very analogous sort of market around the creation of music that was sort of in the past decade taken over by streaming services, Spotify being the leader of it. It's very similar to research because over the past couple of years in research, there's sort of been this movement towards pirating academic literature, a website called Sci-Hub, where people can just illegally upload PDFs of paywalled science, and then anyone can go and download and read that science. Kind of an amazing innovation, if you ask me. But it's not legal. And so it has been shut down recently because, there's all kinds of issues with stealing people's stuff and, opening it up for free, despite how easy it is. So I think a very cool opportunity is to be the place where research is opened to everyone. For instance, I have a friend in a band right now, and rather than just playing a bunch of gigs in their local hometown, they're making Spotify channels and they're trying to increase their clicks and market through Spotify. So yeah, I think big picture, we want to create a place where anyone can learn from research and contribute to it, and then also earn a living from doing so. And I think there's a lot of analogies with how Spotify helped to do that for the music industry.
And what do you imagine, or how does this become a sustainable, I guess, business model down the line? I don't know a lot about research journals. I guess they make money because you have to pay to publish and pay to read. Do you guys imagine this being a decent business, a cash generating business, or how does that fit into it? Or is it more of a hey, this is more of an open source thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the academic publishing industry is a very large business. It's to the tune of $5+ billion annually. There are 4 major players that all have valuations above $1 billion. And sort of the dominant business models currently are subscriptions. So if there's a paywall journal, universities have to pay a subscription in order to read that content. And then for open access literature, there's something called an APC, or an article processing charge. So the idea here is that a scientist will pay between $1,200 to $12,000 when they submit a piece of content to an open access journal in order to pay for the peer review, the typesetting, and the distribution. So APCs are kind of the business model that people are leaning to one other piece of interesting context. About a year ago, there was an executive order from the Biden White House basically requiring that any piece of science that was funded with US citizen taxpayer dollars had to be open access and have open data. So there's sort of like a transition point in the academic publishing marketplace where it's unlikely that paywalls will be a sustainable business model. And some of these more traditional journals are transitioning to an APC-based business model. But again, it all comes to financial incentives. APC-based business models, they tend to also reduce quality in science because as a publisher, your interest is in publishing as many papers as possible. That's how you collect the most APCs. That's how you generate the most revenue. There have been a number of kind of smaller open access journals that have gotten very big over the past 5 to 10 years because they've maximized their APCs. And they call these paper mills. So these are journals that are publishing really low quality papers, oftentimes fake science, in order to generate revenue via APCs. So what we're most excited about at Research Hub is trying to create a business model that aligns our company's interests with that of the scientific community. And we believe the best way to do that is via a transaction fee on funding. So if someone creates a bounty within Research Hub, for instance, a bounty for a peer review, Research Hub collects a transaction fee on top of that, 9% right now, 2 of which goes to the Research Hub Foundation and 7 of which goes to Research Hub Technologies, Inc., which is the DevCo. We want to essentially get into funding scientific research. It's a gigantic marketplace. I think including even private companies, it's $1.2 trillion annually. I know the NSF's budget is above $20 billion every year. And there are a whole, lots of money funded into science via nonprofits and private individuals as well. So if we can help to administer research grants in a more effective way that helps to increase the quality of the science and also reduce the grant giver's overhead, we think that's probably the best way to, make a whole lot of money in a company that will actually increase the quality of research outputs.
Okay, I love that. And that makes a lot more sense to me. Thank you for answering that. When you were describing that, the way that you contribute and publish, kind of the publisher parish kind of thing you were talking about, it made me think that I feel like crypto or open source research provides a unique opportunity of imagine maybe you guys already have this, but imagine you published a piece of research and it was mostly there but incomplete. You needed help with it. And so anyone could come then and contribute with their wallet address or their their identity in the system. And the winning contributions, the people that actually solve it, now get their reputation kind of boosted. They didn't publish the paper, but they did contribute to it, and you can prove that they contributed to it. So maybe you don't even publish papers. You're just a guy that contributes to papers, and you build your reputation that way. And it feels like there's a lot more opportunity for open collaboration in maybe a model like this. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, yeah, you nailed it. We'd love to make research operate a lot more like GitHub does currently. What you're describing to me sounds exactly like an open source repo, and a random person comes in, shares a pull request, and then hey, that's on their GitHub profile, and they can use that in order to get a job or prove their worth, in other kind of parts of the industry. So that's exactly where we want to be. The one issue now is you can't just build the tool. For instance, scientists aren't doing this on GitHub, even though some have tried, because you don't get any money for it and you don't get any reputation for it. So your bibliometrics don't increase by participating in these sort of behaviors. So if we can tie it to financial incentives where this type of thing becomes a sustainable way to contribute, then I think we'll be able to sort of change the way of structuring reporting scientific outputs.
And it feels like this is a really important problem. And like you said, financial incentives. I feel like some people push back on that and they say, oh no, people should just do it because they want to do it and because it's what's right. But the reality is that almost everything, it does tie back to financial incentives, because if you want somebody to do something really hard, you got to give them some sort of incentive to do that. And if you remove that incentive, then they're not going to do it, because why would you go take all this risk and time and money to accomplish this thing when there's no incentive to do so? But it feels like there's a big need in our culture, because if you actually look at the past 20 years, we've invented a lot of things, but it feels like it's a lot of SaaS products, and it feels like it's very similar to crypto and alt layer ones. It's everyone's kind of doing the same thing. It's oh cool, this slightly makes the sales process better, or this makes, Slack, this makes talking at work a little bit better. But like the really big problems in society, it feels like there hasn't been as much innovation in that area. It's all tech, software focused, and not a lot in like all these really meaningful things. And I guess the goal of like Research Hub, Open Science, DeSCI is like, let's bring back funding, let's bring back incentive structure, and let's bring back collaboration in this area so that we can do things like, colonize the moon and cure all disease and all these kind of crazy things that you imagine in a utopian sci-fi future.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, like when you look at GitHub and sort of the effect it's had on software engineering, like one of the most impressive things to me is like you can't even tell like the quality of developer based on where they live anymore. Like basically with all these open source tools, like anyone with an internet connection can teach themselves from code written by some of the best engineers in the world and can pick up those skills and actually like contribute in a meaningful way to projects that like they're not even close to. And so I think a big thing that's going to come in the future is like currently in academia, it's like a very specific type of person who can have success in the current system. Like you need to live kind of in a certain part of the world. You need to have like a financial background where it's reasonable for you to take like your early 20 to mid 30s, making a lot less than the average person your age. And so these sort of like economic like limiters really like prevent the grand majority of humans from participating in the scientific ecosystem. And you get a little bit of like an echo chamber of the folks who are within it. So yeah, we want to create like a way for anyone in the world to like, get paid for their time for contributing to the scientific community. And we hope to sort of unlock new innovations like GitHub has for software engineering by just like empowering a new demographic of people that hasn't really had a realistic path to doing science in the past, being able to contribute on research.
That's so true, because like you might have this problem, like this research paper. What was the one that it was like superconductors or whatever that paper went around?
Superconductors, yeah.
Everyone was excited. They're like, this is going to change the world, and it ended up being a dud. But imagine there's like something like that, a problem like that, and it, because you're only maybe talking to some of your peers at maybe a university or whatever. So you float it by like 10 people, and they're like, no, we don't know how to fix this. And it might be a guy down in Argentina who like, if you were to look at it, the idea pops in his head, and it's like, this is what you need to do. And so the more people you can open it up to, and the more collaboration you enable, especially across the world, like that might be how you solve some of these really crazy problems that would advance us forward in the future. And so I guess I share that vision in what you guys are doing, and that does sound like, the more eyeballs on a problem, the more likely you are to fix that problem and find a solution.
The LK99 example is a great one. I mean, so I've been in scientific publishing now for a while, and I've seen this happen like almost once every 2 years. Like a random group will come out with, like, hey, we've got a new room temperature superconductor, check it out. And so the first time I really remember this was in like 2020-ish, where like a group shared a preprint, and then like there was a lot of conversation about that preprint among the scientific community, where eventually someone named Brian Skinner, another physicist, looked at their results, saw patterns within the results that looked like fraud, and published another preprint calling it out on arXiv. But this time, this is like a lot more interesting and fun. Like there's this claim of, room temperature superconductors. They're publishing like exactly how to make it. And then one of like the biggest replications comes from like an anonymous cat girl in Russia who's like just making the material and like filming it themselves. And like, yeah, you've got like the average person who's able to actually contribute to like a replication study of this result and help to provide further context. So yeah, we want to empower folks like that. Basically, let anyone in the world who's got an interest in this kind of thing like have some stream of capital coming to them if they're producing value in a public way.
I love that. And how much traction have you guys seen so far on Research Hub?
Yeah, so we're between 50 to 60,000 users signed up in total. On any given week, we have like between like 200 to 1,000 weekly active content creators. That's folks like creating stuff on the site. We just started to measure like verified weekly active contributors. So this is like folks who are willing to like, share their ID and do a KYC in order to get the Research Coin rewards for their papers. And right now we're at like 150-ish per week of those, and that's growing. And then most exciting, I think, there's a tweet from Jeff Corey, who's the co-director of the Research Hub Foundation, showing like some of the work that we've done in paid peer reviews. So just starting in early May, we like began paying $150 in Research Coin for peer review on a preprint. And that has exponentially grown over like the resulting, I guess, like 3 months. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we're between like 150 to 170 peer reviews per week. And that's basically at the same rate as like a Nature journal that's at the top of its field. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it so far.
You were just making me think about, weirdly enough, gambling and how how so much money is gambled away in the world of sports betting, just betting in general, casinos, whatever. And like even if they win, the outcome is like there's no necessarily positive outcome. Like they might make money, but that's all, right? Where it feels like a lot more efficient if people were able to gamble on research and ideas and these kind of things. And if they win, yeah, they make a lot of money. But at the same time, like humanity advances at the same time. And so, if we could financialize these things and make it in a way that people kind of got that same thing, like, yeah, maybe it is gambling odds. Maybe it's better than gambling odds if you do enough research and, you really get into your field and you know this specific niche of that sector. But man, if we get direct capital like that, I bet we would advance humanity like scientifically at a pace that overshadows what we've done over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, agree wholeheartedly. So this is like kind of a cliche comment, but like one of the things that really like red pilled me on the potential of decentralized science was just being in a fantasy football league with all my friends from college. And like, it's fun, we all like watching football, but like just the amount of analysis and effort and like pattern matching that goes on, it's just like some bright people doing really bright things in an arena that just doesn't really, it like matters, but like not really, it's just for fun kind of. And so like to be able to like harness some of that excitement and attention and direct it towards things that can have real world impacts, I think would be unbelievable. So yeah, that's like, I guess when you say like, where do we want to be in 20 years? Brian has this sort of way of putting it where like, right now when you look at like, what do kids want to be? They'll say like a YouTuber or like a TikTok influencer, just because like those are sort of the high social standing occupations that they see, in a day-to-day sort of context. And so we want to create the rock star scientist, where if you're someone who contributes, to a like experiment that ends up finding a room temperature superconductor, we want to help you be seen in a way to inspire the next generation of kids to want to do something else like it. And I think a lot of that has to do with like capturing the value that you're creating, which we're hoping to do with Research Coin.
Yeah, like we need a generation of Tony Starks where everyone's like, I want to be this Tony Stark-like person who did all this crazy stuff and invented all these crazy things that changed the world. You mentioned Brian Armstrong, and he lists on his Twitter that he's one of the co-founders of Research Hub. And he seems pretty proud of that because that's like he's co-founder of Coinbase, co-founder of Research Hub. How did that happen? Like, was he there from the initial get-go? How did you get involved with Brian and this whole thing come to be?
Yeah, totally. So we're really lucky to be working with Brian. He's the man and like has so much insight into how to build like a valuable product. We're like ridiculously lucky to be working with him. So I first met Brian because I had built like a V1 of sort of this app while I was in medical school. And I was just looking for people to help fund me because I was running out of money. And like just through manically searching the internet one night, I saw a blog that he had written, which basically detailed a lot of the problems in science and ways that could potentially improve it. And a lot of our sort of vision for how a product could be built in order to fix these problems was aligned. And so I cold emailed him and anyone within a mile of him in order to potentially try and like show him this idea. And so after time, I convinced him to take a meeting with me, flew out to SF, pitched what I was working on. He invested in my company, but it wasn't enough to really keep it going. So I had to eventually shut that project down. And then Brian invited me to come work on Research Hub with him. So basically just trying, like I saw a problem. took my stab at what I thought was the best solution. Brian, I think, was thinking very similar to me. He has a sister who also did a PhD in biological sciences. So I think he's pretty close to a lot of the issues that I'd lived through. And, had similar thinking on ways to build a product to help to fix the problem. So yeah, just a bajillion cold emails. And he had a blog that was similar to how I was thinking.
That's awesome. That's a cool story too. We were talking about before we started this podcast how DeSCI just within the crypto space has not gotten a lot of attention. It's remained pretty much a relatively small niche in crypto so far. Why do you think that is, and how do you see that changing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, curious to hear what you think as well, and really what your audience thinks. So, in my estimation, there's a couple things going on here. The first is that when you look at who's founding these DeSCI projects, they're normally scientists. So it's folks who have dealt with the problem firsthand and are trying to build a solution to help solve it. Scientists oftentimes they don't have a lot of money. They're not the best. This is being just generalizing. There are plenty of super amazing outgoing scientists, but normally a lot of scientists want to just work on their problem and not the best at telling the world about it. And so I think due to the fact that a lot of the early stage folks in this industry are not insanely well capitalized and come from a background that doesn't necessarily lend itself to the Web3 marketing scene, I think most people are kind of just heads down trying to fix problems that they're dealing with in their day-to-day life. There actually has been a lot of success, towards that goal. For instance, we mentioned the BioDAOs from BetaDAO. They're not BetaDAO, Molecule. They're actually funding a lot of research right now, generating innovating, in the IP NFT space on ways that you can do this. There's DeSCI Labs, which is building a on-chain sort of publishing venue for research. A lot of really cool things that are actually getting built, but by scientists who don't really have marketing backgrounds. And then the other piece of this, two more answers. The other piece of this too is I think inherently science is a little bit slower than a lot of people in crypto like to be. For instance, maybe this is TMI, but I don't sports bet a lot, but I'll do it occasionally. I would never sports bet on who's going to win the Super Bowl this year, because that's 8 months from now.
Yeah.
who knows what my life will be like then? So yeah, it's not quite as much fun to bet on something where the outcome isn't resolved, in 8 months as opposed to an hour later. And even in science, 8 months is a very short amount of time. The average grant, once you start sinking money into a project, the results normally aren't published for 5 or 6 years. So I think in general, it sort of requires a longer time horizon to see the results of your investing / gambling, if you will. And I think that's just inherently a little bit less attractive than some of the meme coin style things. I also think there's things that we can do as an industry to help bridge the gap there and maybe provide a little bit of a shorter feedback loop for folks. So we're thinking about it, but in ways that will actually help accomplish our goals, not necessarily create bad incentives as well. And then the last piece of it too is I think the regulatory environment in the States, we're in the States, we're trying to do things the absolute right way and follow all laws that apply to us. And so, yeah, there are just some of the more interesting things that we'd like to experiment with. Our lawyers advise us not to, just to stay compliant with sort of the difficult to read regulatory environment in the US. So I think if that gets figured out, you'd actually see a lot of innovation quickly with these projects trying more interesting things.
I think you nailed it. And it is sad that the regulation is holding back progress and innovation, because everyone wants the results that comes from all this working. And it's frustrating that sometimes regulation stops those really positive results for kind of dumb reasons. I would probably add that I think one reason that DeSCI hasn't caught on also is just when it comes to crypto, there does seem to be a bias towards this X thing was really successful. So Bitcoin was really successful and these things could be the next Bitcoin. Or then Ethereum was really successful. So let's bet on what could be the next Ethereum. And in DeSCI, there hasn't been a breakout app or star or anything like that. And I think once we have that, and it like kind of solidifies as like, oh, cool, this DeSCI project did really well, then you're going to have a bunch of people being like, well, what if these other DeSCI projects are the next, whatever thing. And once you have that, you'll see a lot more traction, I think attention, a lot more building, which is what you want to see. Everyone should want to see, because science is great. It fixes a lot of problems, and we should want it to be more open, free, and just like have the ability to solve these problems without all these weird, cumbersome things that have kind of developed in the current traditional scientific system.
Yeah, for what it's worth, just to jump in there, like I've noticed a little bit of a sentiment shift over the last maybe 3 to 6 months, where a lot of people like in the crypto community on crypto Twitter, they're kind of like frustrated with the trends around meme coins, and like it's all fun and games. I don't think anybody's like upset about it, but like it doesn't like cast the best light on our industry, when we're trying to like have more favorable regulation to do actually cool things. And so like I've noticed a lot more sort of like yearning for use cases in crypto that actually help to solve real world problems that communicate the value that crypto can bring to the world. And so I think like one of the best parts about DeSCI is like the people starting these projects, they're not marketers, they're not business people, they're scientists, because scientists actually have real world problems that can be fixed with crypto. So I think it's really only a matter of time until it becomes obvious to folks that like in the DeSCI industry, real problems, that will look really good, for the outsiders looking in on crypto, are getting solved by the people who experience the problems. So yeah, I think it's really only a matter of time until the space matures and folks start to notice that.
You're totally right, and I would love to see the day where because I tell people that all the time. They're like, so what does crypto do? Like what? Because they just think a currency. They literally think everything's like a weird alternative currency. If you actually talk to a super normal person, they think all of crypto is like alternative currencies, and they don't really understand a lot of what's going on in crypto. But DeSCI is one of the first examples I give. Is like, look at what this is doing. Look at like the open science movement and the way they're using crypto, and like look at what this can enable. And for a lot of people, it's an aha moment where they're like, wow, that's amazing. I see the value there. I want that to happen. So I fully agree that DeSCI is such a positive for crypto, and it helps a lot of people understand that like, okay, crypto is more than just like currencies, blockchains more than currencies. It's really this weird collaboration, like permissionless, almost like free market kind of thing that enables all sorts of unique use cases outside of just something like currency or meme coins or things like that.
Yeah, it's funny because like a lot of scientists in general, they tend to be a little bit more conservative. They tend to sort of have views of themselves that they're doing things for altruistic reasons, not just money. And so like when you ask somebody if they want to accept crypto, to do science, a lot of times like their first opinion is like, no way, like crypto is moon boy Lambos, I don't want to get involved with that. But then they share a peer review and they earn $150 and they can like take their partner out to dinner, that night, and then their tune changes quickly and they tell the person next to them. So yeah, I think it's just like it's a matter of time, until enough folks see value in that and it kind of spreads organically, and then like, everything after that's exponential.
I sure hope so. Okay, last question for you would be like, let's say DeSCI catches on and builds the future of scientific funding. Like, so traditional models broken, and it's like a newspaper, right? Like, and DeSCI is essentially like the internet and YouTube and like online news and podcasts, et cetera. Imagine that comes to pass. What would you imagine all this would enable? So like you have all this open collaboration, the incentive structure is working. It's like near unlimited funding. What would this produce for humanity, or what gets you excited about the future of DeSCI?
Yeah, so I'll start with like negative space first and then move to like more positive things that could actually be built. So like the first thing that I would hope that would like happen because of this is like basically the news articles that come out once every 6 weeks now about scientific fraud and like all this money down the drain due to exploring hypotheses that were like 100% followed due to fraudulent papers. Like I think that you could stop that in its tracks. Like basically the broken incentives where scientists are encouraged to create low quality research just to receive more grant funding. Like we could make sure that didn't happen, and that all of the money that's spent chasing sort of like untrue results were reallocated to much more important replicable topics. So yeah, I think like just a higher quality of research in general. Another thing that we mentioned earlier in this podcast is like the ability for anyone to contribute to this. So not just like your standard academics, like sharing, scientific findings, but like everyone feels empowered to contribute in a way where their contributions help to improve the outcome. So going back to like the food pyramid, like will we be told what's best for us just from folks within an ivory tower who may have all kinds of different incentives, or will there be a feedback mechanism where the average person can also comment on the findings and help to refine the world's understanding of like new scientific topics? And then I think like the combination of these two things will result in a world where, kind of like you mentioned before, there's been a lot of, innovation in like bits, but not in like molecules. So having a flying car, right? Like new medications, for instance, like I was frustrated that there were no like solid cures for anxiety, depression, PTSD, OCD, like to be able to actually have treatments that improve the quality of lives of patients. It's almost like the potential is unlimited if you can fix the infrastructure for how we actually create this new knowledge in order to have more efficient like conversion of capital into science. So yeah, I think just higher quality ways of funding and reporting science will result in a lot of the innovations that we've been promised in the 21st century.
Well, it's been great having you on, Patrick. This has been a really great conversation to dive into DeSCI and hopefully spurs more conversation throughout crypto about what's going on in DeSCI.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And just for anybody who's listening, if you're curious to learn more, you can find Research Hub at researchhub.com. We're on X and LinkedIn at Research Hub. And then I'm on X. My tag is at Joysticks. So feel free to shoot me a message too if you'd like to participate in Research Hub or have any questions.
As always, know this is investment advice. You should always do your own research. Crypto is risky, and you should never invest more than you're willing to lose. Also, as a disclaimer, we talked about quite a bit Research Coin in this episode. I personally hold Research Coin. That is, so take that as you will. Maybe you have a bias toward it. For me, it really is, I'm excited about Research Coin. I'm excited about Research Hub because I'm excited about the potential for DeSCI, what's being built, and how that could optimize science to be a far more efficient. And when you look at the downstream effects of that and what it could result for what it could enable for humanity, it gets me pretty excited. When it comes to curing disease, feeding the world, and all sorts of really cool, amazing sci-fi utopia type outcomes.